Right, I'm hoping to just sort of give a couple of minutes insight into what I'm battling with here with this Crusader, well, Olympic, trying to get a tick over from it. And these are actually the Royal Enfield 250 unit singles are among the most difficult I've ever known to get a decent tick over from. You get them to run right, run nice, perform well, you try and get a tick over out of some of them, and this is one of them. And I'm just going to do this just to show what happens. Right, I'll start it up again and I'll set a higher tick over. You can play about with the mixture screw and the tick over screw, the needle, swap slides, and even mess with the ignition timing till it blew in the face. Will it take the throttle? No, it won't. I'll start it up again without adjusting anything, and you'll see that the engine, after I give it some throttle, will race and take an age to slow down to that steady speed, and then it'll stall. Here we go. So say you're riding it around now and you're throttling off to come to a junction or down a hill. So you're losing a load of your engine braking there because it's ticking over far too fast. Now, you'd be tempted to back the tick over screw off, but here we go. What's happening here? Now, if I try and grab a bit there. Got that terrible lag on the overrun. That's too fast. Got no engine braking there. And here we go, hang on, it's slowing down now. And on and on and on. When I screw the mixture screw in, it'll stop it racing like that. But it'll stop the engine as well, probably. Let's see. And that's what I've been battling with. I've spent a few hours on it yesterday. I changed a throttle slide, I moved the needle position, I changed the main jet, I changed the pilot jet, I played about with the mixture screws. I'm tempted just to set this not to tick over because I can get it to run nicely. I mean, I've even been moving the ignition timing. I've marked it where it runs nicely and where it ought to be, but just out of interest I've also tried different timing settings and I can't get it to tick over properly or steadily. That's where I am at the moment. So I just wanted to highlight that. Oh, and that was another thing. I even changed the float height on the carburettor by changing a float needle in there for the old plastic type rather than the metal type with the rubber tip, which does affect the float height. And even that has had no influence. And the carburettor is supposedly a new one. I'm tempted to change it anyway, just to see, but I shouldn't have to. But I think that's what I'm going to do next. Well, I've covered just a few more miles on this machine without taking the camera along, because I've been up and down a lane and just nipping along a short section of the village bypass and so on while I've been making minor adjustments to the ignition timing, which is now back where I had it initially after I first adjusted it, which was correct. I just thought that maybe retarding it might have steadied the tick over while I was chasing a tick over. I've given up on that now, the tick over, for the time being. Just concentrated on getting it running well and getting that first gear selection problem sorted, which I have done. I've overcome that now, and the gears are working well now, and the engine's performing nicely. But we've got no tick over still, and we've got this oil leak still coming from there, which unfortunately does look like it's probably coming from the base of the cylinder barrel, which wouldn't be quite so bad as maybe the crankcase joint. I'm hoping it's not that, but that's obviously going to have to be dealt with, unfortunately. That's only come to light since I stopped all the leaks from the cylinder head and the rocker box. I just assumed that all the oil was coming from there, but obviously we've got a tiny leak down there to deal with as well, which means I've got to backtrack and take the head off again and also lift the barrel this time, but it's got to be done. Anyway, I just sort of rode into the yard here, and I was going to get the bike on the bike lift, and I thought I'd get it back out into the sun and just make this clip and sort of update where I'm at with it. And I literally clutched it, put it into first gear, opened the throttle, rode it up here, blipped the throttle a couple of times because it won't tick over, and I was greeted with that. The twist grip went all limp and the throttle cable was broken, so that's another little thing to deal with. I seriously think that carburettor is a 389 monoblock. I think it's too big for this engine. It should be a 376 at biggest, and that could possibly have some influence on the tick over, which is never great on these machines from what I've experienced anyway. But I think perhaps that carburettor is just being a little bit too large, is compounding matters, possibly, because it's running alright other than that. But got to deal with that next. I'm sure the owner would want it sorted, so better get it back on the bike lift and take the top end off and the cylinder barrel and try and stop that leak, and just hope that it's not the crankcase joint that it's coming from, because if it is, then that's a biggie. We've got the top end of the Olympic engine fully stripped now, and it certainly looks as if the oil leak was coming from the base gasket there where the cylinder barrel joins the crankcase, so that's good that it's not the crankcase joint. But rather less welcome is this. And I'd noticed actually after taking the cylinder head off, when I tightened it down, that this sort of had a bit of a vague feel to it when the nut was tightening, although it did tighten, but it's obviously pulled up into the hole at the bottom of the cylinder barrel and actually locked itself into there. So all it's done is sort of actually jammed the cylinder head against the barrel without pulling it down fully into the crankcase at that corner. It looks like there's a helicoil or something there that's been pulling out or winding out or whatever, so that's not a very pleasant find, but I'll have to investigate that and deal with it. So the whole top end is off, and hopefully, subject to me sorting this out, I can put it back together with a new gasket and stop that oil leak from the cylinder base at least. So round and round in circles we go. Where it'll end nobody knows, but hopefully this will be the last time, the second time and last time that I have to take the cylinder head off this thing, all being well. Well, unfortunately I feared the worst with that cylinder barrel and head stud. It was helicoiled, and unfortunately the helicoil has pulled out of the crankcase, which means that the oversized hole and the oversized thread that had already been made to take the helicoil has also stripped. So now I'm going to have to try and think up of a thread size larger again. Luckily there is enough wall thickness and depth there to do it. I'll have to find a suitable size bit of thread bar or bolt or something that'll that I can tap that out so that the shank of the bolt or the thread bar will screw into, and then I'll have to get that in a lathe and bore it out and thread the inside of it to the original size for the cylinder barrel stud to screw into again. So that's probably going to take a big chunk of tomorrow to do all that, but it's going to have to be done. So another grim discovery to deal with, and that'll be the phone, so I'm going to go and answer that, I guess. So I've removed the piston now because I'm going to have the room to work around the crankcase mouth, doing something about that strip thread there. It's an absolute mess. So I decided I'd take the rings off the piston and check their gaps in the cylinder bore as well. And the top compression ring and the oil ring got quite large gaps. I've seen worse, but they could be a bit smaller, but not too alarming. But then I saw the gap of the second compression ring, and well, you could just about drive a bus through that. And I don't know what planet whoever it was on that fitted that, or perhaps they just didn't measure it or whatever, I don't know, but that's disgusting, that. So I think we'll be having a new set of rings for it as well. So it's going to be in bits for a little while. I won't be riding this until after the weekend, when the various parts I need are ordered and arrived. Gaskets, piston rings, probably a few other little bits and pieces as well. And finally we'll get this thing knocked into shape. But that's probably, there's been quite a bit of smoke from the exhaust on this machine, especially when it first starts up, which I thought might have been a bit of wet sumping, but thinking about it now, that would be putting immense pressure on the oil ring, which itself I wouldn't say has got a minimal gap. It might have been sort of acceptable at a push, but I'll get a full new set of rings for it, I think, and start again with that.